Welcome back everyone. So in this video we will discuss evaluation studies, introduction, how would you find out whether the children, their teacher and their parents can use the app effectively, whether it's satisfying to use, what evaluation methods would you employ. Increasingly, elements of usability testing experiments and in-the-wild studies are conducted remotely using tracking software to record participants' interactions and using social media for communication with participants. So, in this chapter, we will discuss what evaluation, how to choose evaluation methods, whether it's remotely, physically, and then what elements of usability testings we would use in the experiments. In addition to keeping both participants and evaluators safe, remote testing is attractive because it saves time traveling to distant locations and the need to schedule and pay for lab time. Therefore, remote testing tends to be less expensive than in-person testing. But there are also some drawbacks to be aware of. For example, remote testing may require more careful advanced planning as it will be more difficult for the evaluator to address problems. Developing a relationship with the remote participants may also be more difficult and take longer. With this range of user testing approaches, we focus on the following: usability testing, which takes place in usability labs and other controlled lab-like settings; remote studies, in which evaluators may interact with participants synchronously, asynchronously, or not at all; experiments, which usually takes place in research labs but can sometimes be done remotely; in-the-wild studies, which takes place in natural settings such as people's homes, school, work, and leisure environments. Usability testing. Performing usability testing in a laboratory or in a temporarily assigned controlled environment enables designer to control what participants do and also to control the environmental and social influences that might impact the participants' performance. The goal is to test whether the product being developed is usable by the intended participants to achieve the task for which it was designed, and whether participants are satisfied with their experience. So the goal of usability testing is to check if the product actually fulfills the task it was meant to do. So it was uh, being done in a laboratory in the past in a controlled environment because it enables designer to control what participants do and also to control the environment and social influences that may impact the performance. But increasingly, we also do remote testing and the natural and in the wild experiment because this mobile technology is not being used in the lab. They are being used in real world. For some products, such as games, designers also want to know whether their product is enjoyable and fun to use. This is an important business goal. Increasingly, aesthetic design has become important, especially for websites designed to sell products. As we've said, usability is how easily a person can accomplish a given task with your product. It is the result of intentional, research-based, and user-tested design decisions made with one goal in mind: to make it easy as possible for users to do what they need to do with the product. Put very simply, usability is the ease with which a person can accomplish a given task with your product. And whether you're designing a login screen, a search experience, or anything else you can imagine, usability is essential. Usability is rarely, if ever, accidental. If you leave usability up to chance, you're likely to end up with a product that's great in theory, perhaps even visually striking, but ultimately inefficient or frustrating to use. Rather, usability is the result of choices that designers make based on solid research and testing. So it's about conscious decision every step of the design, weighing pros and cons, and then doing reflective thinking about the user research, the evaluation, and the time constraints. Of course, you might still put up with a phone that's good, got poor usability, but in that case, there are likely other elements elsewhere in hierarchy or in the user experience as a whole that compensate for the usability problems, at least for a time. The rest of the narrative is UX, your experience with the company and their products from beginning to end. The long wait, the bad music, how you were left in the dark regarding the wait time, the attitude of the person you spoke with, and the lack of clarity on how to accomplish a simple task, exchanging the item. This is all UX. So that's the difference for usability and UX. UX concerned with the overall experience. So sometimes you might think that for some aspects these are bad, like design or bad experience, but for overall experience, people like feel a certain way, just like how people stay in a company, although there's some aspects that really bullshit, but overall, like they like the job. So the UX experience was designed uh, in a great way, kind of, if you're looking at the retention metrics for those companies. So the site's usability was somewhat less stellar when it came to finding a way to contact customer service. You had to do a little digging around. Maybe that was intentional on their part, maybe not. But at a relatively anxious touch point in your customer journey, you were finding what you needed when you needed it. If you were going to rate this site's usability, it might get 3 to 4 stars out of 5. Its UX, however, it might depend on when in the long and mostly painful journey you decided to give a rating. So basically, sometimes their overall experience are good, but for some part, like finding the contact number, it took you a while because the contact number are hidden. So those are usability problem. And what will those efforts look like? 3 words: research and testing. So to avoid the usability be accidental, we need to research and test. So if you grasp at design solutions without researching and understanding the real problem, or you'll find your efforts about as effective as taking unknown medications for a head cold. Might work, probably won't, and likely to cause some weird side effects. So this usability, it's not accidental because you need to do some research with the actual users and to test it in real world. So you might get lucky, but if you didn't if you were not intentional in doing it, then you will probably won't be able to consistently apply these usability principles. Similarly, if you conducted extensive user research and implemented what seemed to be really awesome design solutions, but you never conduct usability testing on those solutions to see if they're actually making the product more usable, you won't know how to improve on those solutions until new problems have sprouted. Research and testing, folks, don't skim on these 2 elements. Any other deliverable that helps visualize the needs that your solution should address. You should take usability into account with every single one of these deliverables and keep at the forefront of your inquiry through empathize and define stage. So here is the empathize and the define stage. During the prototype and test stages, it's critical to constantly reference the deliverables you created in the research phase. So in the emphasize and the define, that's where you do the research. Keep usability at the forefront as you're testing, even or especially when you're still working with prototypes and wireframes. So for UX designer, you're typically are delivering or providing deliverables such as wireframe. You need to keep this emphasize and define stage in mind, especially not just in the start, but also in prototyping and testing. Usability is a key component of a good product or experience. You can have the most flashy designs and snazzy UX, but with poor usability, your users will encounter problems that could and probably will eventually drive them to use other products. Simplicity is serving users what they need and when they need it in the most straightforward way possible. So here's the quotes that are useful. In UX, users are ruthlessly obsessed with doing whatever they need to do as quickly as possible by choosing the path of least resistance. When complex features happens, the original value of the product is lost, and the user is completely confused by the number of options. Going back 10 years, web forms were often extremely taxing to fill in and lock the visual prompts we are now used today. The user often didn't know they had missed a field until they had already selected complete form. So forms are terrible like 10 years ago. The piano is too complex because it has 88 keys and 3 pedals. So here's a counter argument for simplicity. The piano is complex, so should we simplify it? Surely no piece of music uses all of those keys. The cry for simplicity misses the point. So sometimes simplicity is not applicable. So there's much more to UX than just simplifying. UX is about understanding users and what they are trying to achieve. So these are 5 steps of the design thinking process. Collecting data about people's performance on predefined tasks has always been central component of usability testing, as described in some early texts in 1986 and 1994. So collecting data, like gathering user profile, is essential in design or in not making the UX or usability an accident. As mentioned in chapter 14, a combination of methods is used to collect data, which usually include log strokes, mouse and other movements such as swiping, pointing, and dragging objects, and video recordings of participants, including their facial expressions. Sometimes participants are asked to describe out loud what they are thinking and doing. The think aloud technique while carrying out tasks. In addition, participants complete a user satisfaction questionnaire about their reactions to using the product using rating scales and answering questions. So there are different ways to collect data from the users, such as this log stroke using web analytics, which we will discuss in the next videos, and answering questions. Structured and semi-structured interviews may also be used to collect information about what participants like and did not like about the product. Evaluators may also observe and collect data about how the product is used in natural settings such as offices, hotels, people's homes, etc. Examples of the tasks that are typically given to participants include searching for information, comparing different icons, navigating through different menus, and downloading apps. So these are the examples, especially for websites. The tasks are given are searching for information, comparing different icons, navigating through different menus, and downloading apps. Performance times and the number and type of actions performed by participants are the two main performance measures. So the type of action and then how long was that action was executed. Obtaining these two measures involves recording the time it takes typical users to complete a task, such as finding a topic on a website, and the number of errors that users make, such as when selecting incorrect menu options or links. The following quantitative performance measures were identified in the late 1990s, and they are still used as a baseline for collecting user performance data, which it was created in 1997. Number of people completing a task successfully, time to complete the task, time to complete the task after specified time away from the product, number and type of errors per task, number of errors per unit of time, number of times people navigate to an item such as an online help, number of people making the same or similar errors. A key concern when doing usability testing is the number of participants that should be involved. Early research suggests that 5 to 12 is an acceptable number in 99, though most often regarded as being better because the results represented a larger and often broader selection of the participants' population. However, sometimes it is reasonable to involve fewer participants, and there are budget and schedule constraints. For instance, quick feedback about a design idea, such as the initial placement of a logo on a website, can be obtained from only 2 or 3 participants reporting on how quickly they spot the logo and whether they like its design. So sometimes it's reasonable to get fewer participants if you have less time and budget. Sometimes more participants can involve early on by distributing an initial questionnaire online to collect information about their concerns. The main concerns can then be examined in a more detailed in a follow-up lab-based study with a small number of typical participants. So sometimes you need to ask questionnaire and then before you actually conduct the experiments in a lab. Labs and equipment. These labs spaces can vary and can be arranged to mimic features of the real world superficially. For example, when testing an office product or a product for use in a hotel reception area, the lab can be set up to resemble those environments. Soundproofing and lack of windows, co-workers, and other workplace and social distractions are eliminated so that participants can concentrate on the tasks that have been set up for them to perform. Typically, a large company labs contain 2 to 3 wall-mounted video cameras that record the participants' behavior, such as hand movements, facial expressions, and general body language. Microphones are placed near where the participant will be sitting to record their comments. Video and other data are fed through to monitors in the observation room. Figure 15.1 shows a typical arrangement in which designers in an observation room are watching a usability test through a one-way mirror. So, diagram of the usability lab used by the US Health and Human Services Government Department. So you have this one large screen and then you record eye movement and facial expression and then general body language. As the participants move around the mall, so this is another experiments where participants move around the mall to check how does what they put their attention to when shopping in the mall. So as the participants move around the mall, their gaze was recorded and analyzed to determine the percentage of time that they were looking at different things. This was done by using software that converted eye gaze movement so that they could be overlaid on a video of the scene. The researchers then coded the participants' gazes based on where they were looking. For instance, at the architecture of the mall, products, people, signage, large text, or displays. Several other quantitative and qualitative analyses were also performed. So they use a software that automatically log data or analyze the data and then compile that into the database that allows them for easy integration of the data analysis. So here is a Tobii Glass mobile eye tracking system and then Tobii mobile eye tracking on sale. So these kind of devices that use in the lab are increasingly less expensive because of like the hardware becoming more expensive nowadays. So it's easy to conduct these controlled experiments. In remote usability testing, the participants carry out tasks with the product in their own setting, communicating with evaluators digitally via Zoom, Teams, or other digital communication systems, while their interactions are logged remotely. The COVID-19 pandemic provided additional stimulus to develop and refine remote testing techniques and equipment. Bring together 2 to 4 colleagues, but make sure they're people who know nothing about the material you're testing. Although your colleagues need not present your target audience, you can ask them to use personas to think about a user's perspective. If you'd like some tips on how to use persona, check out this article about different ways to approach a form. Depending on the time you have available for each session, you can work with anywhere between 4 and 8 participants for this test. You don't need to pay your participants, but you might consider giving a small token of appreciation like a promotional item provided by your company. So when you're doing this usability testing, it's okay to have between 4 to 8 participants, and then you don't need to pay them. A promotional item provided by your company is enough. So a small token of gifts goes a long way. Full usability tests can be conducted with anywhere between 8 and 100 participants. Most of these usability tests include 8 to 20 participants in individual sessions that last between 30 and 90 minutes. So a full usability test can be conducted between 8 to 100 participants. So 100 is the max. So most of these are 8 to 20 participants between 30 and 90 minutes. Most will be about an hour long. Recruiting. Recruit your participants in advance. Schedule each session for between 30 and 45 minutes to give enough time to conduct the test. Jot down notes and get ready for the next participant. We recommend having at least a half-hour break between sessions. After the test, thank them for the time and give them a copy of the thank you card on the way out. 2 case studies follow. The first is a classic usability test of a pre-release version of Apple's iPad that focuses on how to do usability testing when faced with time and other constraints. The second case study focuses on how to test complex products remotely using VR. This case study also addresses the precautions that were necessary to protect participants and evaluators from COVID-19 during the early days of the pandemic. So let's watch this. Running a remote usability test part 1 and then running a remote usability test part 2.
In this 2-part series of videos, I'll walk you through how to run a remote moderated usability test. In this video, we'll look at starting the session. First, as with any moderated study, it's a good idea to send out day of reminders to participants. Confirm their session start time and tell them how long it's going to take. Tell them which devices or equipment they'll need, like their phone, their charger, and a pair of headphones, for example. If they need to install any kind of app in advance of the session, for example, Zoom, remind them to do so. You should also tell them how to join the session when it's time. That might mean providing the meeting link in the email or message. Finally, remind the participant to be somewhere where they'll have access to good, stable Wi-Fi and where they won't be interrupted by loud noises. And that is more necessary than you might think. Sometimes participants don't realize that those are 2 very important things. Next, you have to coordinate how you'll get your participants and observers into the session. In a physical space, this is pretty easy. You get the observer situated, sometimes in a separate observer room, while the participant waits in a waiting room. But in a virtual context, it can be a little trickier. Getting the observer set up usually includes recapping any important rules, like don't unmute yourself during the session. You might also want to give them a few details about the participant or ask them to watch for certain potential issues or opportunities. During this time, it's important that the participant cannot see or hear you or your observers. I really like using Zoom's waiting room feature for this. That way I can let my observers in before I admit my participant. If you're using software that doesn't have a waiting room feature, you can hold off on sending the participant the link to the meeting until you're totally ready. That approach can work fine, but it does add a few extra minutes to the beginning of the session. And you have to warn the participant that that is how you're going to bring them in. So next, you'll start the session with the participant. You want to welcome them and thank them and ask them how to pronounce their name correctly. That's something that might be good to do in a physical test, an in-person test, but in a virtual one, you'll need to use the participant's name more often to get their attention, especially since they can't see you while they're screen sharing. It's a good idea to briefly mention observers, particularly if the participant can see the list of people in the meeting and will know that they're there. I usually say something like, we have some people in the meeting with us, they'll be quietly observing and looking for ways to improve this product. If you didn't already have your participant sign a consent form in advance of the session, you can have them do it at this point. Then ask if it's okay to begin recording, and when the participant agrees, begin. Then you can ask the participant to start sharing their screen and begin to run the session. So we'll pick it up from here in the next video on running and wrapping up the test session. This is the second video in a 2-part series about running a remote moderated usability test. We ended the last video having set up the test session with the participant sharing their screen. At this point, or right before the participant shares their screen, you might pause before beginning the session and ask the participant a few interview questions. Usually these will be relevant to the test. You might ask if the participant has ever used this app before, or you might ask behavior questions, things like, what kinds of things do you normally shop for online? These questions will give you context about the participant's experiences and preferences, but it will also help to make the participant a bit more comfortable talking to you. Next, you can start the session by administering the first task. I think it's really important to make sure that participants have a written copy of the task instructions that they can easily refer back to when they want to check what they're supposed to be doing. Many video conferencing tools have a chat feature, and that's my favorite way to deliver task instructions. I can just copy the text from my facilitator's guide and then drop it into the chat when it's time to do the task. The participant can easily open up the chat panel to review the task instructions during the test. People can sometimes feel very self-conscious in remote sessions, so I often find that they need a little bit of extra reassurance. In every single session I facilitate, I make a point of telling the participant that they're doing a great job. After the participant seems to have the hang of thinking out loud, I'll usually tell them something like, I know that this can sometimes feel really uncomfortable, but you're doing a great job thinking out loud, and this is exactly what we need. When the session is over, you'll ask any remaining follow-up questions. Then you'll thank the participant and tell them how and when they'll receive their thank you gift. In an in-person study, this is usually easy. Maybe you just hand the person an envelope with the incentive. When testing remotely, remember that people are often very anxious about making sure that they do get the incentive. So tell them specifically how and when that will happen. For example, you might say something like, you'll get an Amazon gift card in your inbox within 1 hour. Then ask the participant to leave the session. But you and your observers aren't done yet. Another downside of remote testing is that unless you plan for it, there's way less discussion and analysis with your team. Make sure you schedule at least 15 minutes at the end of each session for you to discuss with your observers and reflect on what you've seen so far. You'll also need at least another 15 to 30 minutes to reset and prepare for your next session. So make sure that you're leaving about 30 to 60 minutes in between each session when you schedule them. You might also want to have a larger research reflection workshop scheduled with your observers at the very end of the study. You can review and discuss findings to start the transition from conducting the study to analysis.
So there you go. It emphasizes how participants are anxious for their incentives or gift if doing remote evaluation or test, usability test. Additionally, you also need to ask for the same experience of the participants because you may not be aware of their history. So here's the case study, testing the iPad usability, the first case study. Completing the study quickly was important because Raluca and Jacob wanted to give feedback to third-party developers who were creating apps and websites for the iPad. These developers were designing products with little or no contact with the iPad developers at Apple when the iPad was first released, who needed to keep details about the design of the iPad secret until it was launched. For the first user testing study, Nielsen in 2010 used two evaluation methods. Usability testing with Think Aloud, in which participants said what they were doing and thinking as they did it, which is discussed in the previous video, and an expert review, which is a method discussed in chapter 16. So in the next, that would be in the next video. So basically, it requires the participant to think aloud while doing this task, and an expert review. So this is a method that we will discuss in the next chapter. A key question the researcher asked about whether the participants' expectations were different for the iPad as compared to the iPhone. They focus on this issue because a previous study of the iPhone showed that people preferred using apps to browsing the web because the latter was slow and cumbersome at that time. The researchers wonder whether this would be the same for the iPad, where the screen was larger and web pages were more similar to how they appeared on the laptops or desktop computers that most people were accustomed to using at the time. So these are their initial theories. The usability testing was carried out in two cities in the United States, Fremont and California, and Chicago, Illinois. The test sessions were similar. The goal of both was to understand the typical usability issues that participants encounter when using application and accessing websites on the iPad. 7 participants were recruited. All were experienced iPhone users who had owned their phones for at least 3 months and who had used a variety of apps. One reason for selecting participants who use iPhones was because they would have had previous experience in using apps and the web with a similar interaction style as the iPad. The participants were considered to be typical users who represented the range of those who might purchase an iPad. 2 participants were in their 20s, 3 were in their 30s, 1 was in their 50s, and 1 was in their 60s. 3 were males and 4 were females. Before taking part, the participants were asked to read and sign an informed consent form agreeing to the terms and conditions of the study. This form described the following: what participant would be asked to do, the length of the time needed for the study, the compensation that would be offered for participating in the study, the participant right to withdraw from the study at any time, a promise that the person identity would not be disclosed, an agreement that the data collected from each participant would be confidential and would not be made available to marketers or anyone other than the researchers. So the test The session started with the participants being invited to explore any application they found interesting on the iPad. They were asked to comment on what they were looking for or reading, what they like and dislike about a site, and what made it easy or difficult for them to carry out a task. A moderator sat next to each participant, observed, and took notes. The sessions were video recorded and they lasted about 90 minutes each. Participants worked on their own. After exploring the iPad, the participants were asked by the researchers to open specific apps or websites, explore them, and then carry out one or more tasks as they would have if they were on their own. Each participant was assigned the task in random order. All of the apps that were tested were designed specifically for the iPad, but for some tasks, the participants were asked to do the same task on a website that was not specifically designed for the iPad. For this task, the researchers took care to balance the presentation order so that the app would be the first presented for some participants and the website would be the first presented for others. More than 60 tasks were chosen from more than 32 different sites. Examples are shown in Table 15.1. iBook task: download a free copy of Alice Adventures in Wonderland and read through the first few pages. Craigslist: find some free mulch of your garden. Time Magazine: browse through magazine and find the best pictures of the week. Epicurious: you want to make an apple pie tonight? Find a recipe and see what you need to buy in order to prepare it. Kayak: you're planning a trip to Death Valley in May this year. Find a hotel located in the park or close to the park. What was the main purpose of the study? What aspects are considered to be important for good usability and user experience in the study? How representative do you consider the task outlined in Table 15.1 to be or for a typical iPad user? First, the main purpose of the study was to find out how participants interacted with the iPad by examining how they interacted with the apps and websites that they used on the iPad. The findings were intended to help designers and developers determine whether specific features would need to be developed for the websites and apps to run on the iPad. The definition of usability in Chapter 1, What is Interaction Design, suggests that the iPad should be efficient, effective, safe, easy to learn, easy to remember, provide a satisfying user experience, and have good utility, that is, good usability. The definition of user experience suggests that it should also support creativity and be motivating and helpful. So let's back up a little bit. So we discussed the definition of usability in Chapter 1, and it suggests that the iPad should be efficient, effective, safe, easy to learn, and easy to remember, and then provide a satisfying experience. So it's kind of like a heuristics. So the definition of user experience suggests that it should also support creativity and be motivating to use and helpful. So the iPad is designed for general public, so the range of users is broad in terms of age and experience with technology. So these are intended for the designers of this product, as described in Chapter 1. The tasks are a small sample of the total set prepared by researchers. They cover shopping, reading, planning, and finding a recipe, which are common activities that people engage in during their everyday lives. The equipment: a camera recorded the participants' interaction and gestures when using the iPad and streamed the recording to a laptop computer. So here's the picture. A webcam was also used to record the expression on the participants' faces and their think aloud commentary. The laptop runs software called Moray, which synchronously these two data streams up to 3 observers, including the moderator, sitting next to the participant. Watch the video streams on their laptop situated on the table, so that they did not invade the participants' personal space rather than observing the participants directly. So there's a 3 observers, up to 3, that is sitting next to the participants that watch the video streams on their laptops so that it's not intrusive to the participants. A camera are used to record interaction to the iPad and gestures when using the iPad. And then it automatically stream it to a laptop computer. So it also use webcam to record expressions of the participant faces when doing a think aloud commentary. Usability problems. The main findings from the study show that the participants were able to interact with websites on the iPad, but it was not optimal. For example, links on the pages were often too small to tap on reliably, and the fonts were sometimes difficult to read. The various usability problems identified in the study were classified according to a number of well-known interaction design principles and concepts, including mental models, navigation, quality of image, problems of using a touchscreen with small target areas, lack of affordance, getting lost in the application, effects of changing orientation, working memory, and feedback received. Getting lost in an application is an old but important problem for designers of digital products, and some participants get lost because they tap the iPad too much, so could not find a back button and could not get back to the home page. Other problems arose because apps appear differently in the two views possible on the iPad, portrait and landscape. So here we identify a lot of usability problems. Interpreting and presenting data. Based on the findings of their study, Nielsen made a number of recommendations, including supporting standard navigation. The result of the study were written up as a report that was made publicly available to app developers and the general public. It provided a summary of key findings for the general public as well as specific details of the problems the participants had with the iPad so that developers could decide whether to make specific websites and apps for the iPads. So another key thing to notice here is that these are like kind of the same process for finding usability issues and interpreting and presenting data. So another thing is that this analysis, or based on the interpretation of this result, Nielsen recommend to make this the UI consistent on the app, so that it's not different interface for different apps. While revealing how usable website and apps are on the iPad, this user testing did not address how the iPad would be used in people's everyday lives. This required a study where observations were made of how people use iPads in their own homes, at school, in the gym, and when traveling. But this did not happen because of the lack of time. So because there's time constraints, I mean these experiments are not perfect. So it could be improved, but because they need to deliver, so sometimes you won't get this time perfect because of the nature of the experiments you're trying to observe. So activity: was the selection of participants for the iPad study appropriate? Justify your comments. What might have been some of the problems with asking participants to think out loud as they completed the task? How do you think testing a new version of the iPad now would be different from the testing done by Nielsen almost 15 years ago? The researchers tried to get a representative set of participants across an age, gender, and gender range with similar skill levels. That is, participants who had already used an iPhone. Ideally, it would have been good to have an additional participants to see whether the findings were more generalized across the broad range of users for whom the iPad was designed. However, it was important to do the study as quickly as possible and get the results to developers and to the general public. If a person is concentrating hard on a task, it can be difficult to talk at the same time. This can be overcome by asking participants to work in pairs so that they talk to each other about the problems that they encountered. There would likely be several differences. It would certainly be easier to find suitable participants as many more people have experienced iPads an iPhone, so the mode of interaction would be more familiar to more people. There would likely be more emphasis on testing a range of different apps, including Siri interactive maps, online food ordering services, and social media. Plus, many designers are now much more familiar with designing for a range of different size tablets and other mobile devices. So, to answer the question, they get a representative set of participants that mimics the overall population. So, another thing is that the thinking out loud could be used with other participants so that they are motivated to talk about the product. So, if we do the experiments now, it will be easier to find suitable participants since people now have experience with the iPad. So there will be likely more emphasis on testing wide range of different apps that are now commonly used like Siri, interactive maps, online food ordering, social media, etc. So here a rocket surgery made easy by Steve Krug usability demo. Let's watch.
This is the demo test that I recorded to go along with my book, Rocket Surgery Made Easy. The main purpose of this demo is just to show you how simple I think usability testing can should be. In most ways, this demo is exactly like the kind of test I recommend you do on your own website. The main difference is the actual test would have more tasks or longer tasks, so it would last than an hour instead of 20 minutes. You should know that I didn't choose the site using this demo because it had a lot of problems. In fact, just the opposite. I like to use well-designed sites when I do demos because I think it's important for people to understand that even the best sites always have usability problems. At the end of the demo, I'm going to ask you to list the 3 most serious usability problems you noticed during the test, and then I'll give you my top 3 problems so you can compare your list to mine. So, tell me, I'm Steve, and I'm going to walk you through this session today. We're going to have some information for you, and I'm going to read it to make sure that I cover everything. You probably heard why we asked you to what we're going to do. We're asking people to try using the website we're working on so we can see whether it works as intended. This session will take about 20 minutes. The first thing I like to write is the site, not you. You can't do anything wrong here. This is probably just one place that we don't have to worry about things. Good. As you use the site, I'm going to ask you as much as possible to try to think out loud, to say what you're looking at and what you're trying to do and what you're thinking. This will be a help to us. Also, please don't worry, you're going to hurt our feelings. We're doing this to improve the site so you get your reaction. Okay. If you have any questions, we go on, just ask them. I may not be able to answer them right away since we're interested in how people do when they don't have something to answer them. But if you still have any questions when we're done, I'll try to answer them then. And if you can wait any questions on that. You may notice this microphone. With your permission, we're going to record what happens on the screen and our conversation. The recording is only going to be help figure out how to improve the site and what we see by except people working on this project. And it helps me because I don't have to take any notes. Also, there are a few people from the web design team observing this session in another room. They can't see us, they can see this. If you would, I'm going to ask you to sign a simple permission form for us. It just says that we have your permission to record you. And the recording will only be seen by people working on projects. Okay. So, you have any questions so far? No? Okay. Before we get started, I'm going to ask you just a few questions first. What's your occupation? What do you do on it?
I am currently employed. I volunteer to class weekly. I was in healthcare most of my adult life, in management, healthcare management, and chose to stay home when my son was 2, so it's been a long time.
Okay. And what did you do in healthcare management?
I managed an admitting office in the hospital. I supervised the pediatric department and the nurse department. I many different things.
So you work with adults and kids, so just give me
Yeah, I brought computers to the hospital.
Okay, great. And so now you're in this computer?
Yes, I am.
In this what?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, all right. Now, about the, roughly, how many hours a week altogether, just a ballpark estimate, would you say you spend using the internet, including both web browsing and email, and working out? So altogether, ballpark figure.
So embarrassing.
It's never embarrassing. Everybody just spend a lot of time.
I would guess 20 hours a week.
Okay,
That's not working.
okay. Okay, and in that time, what's the split between email and browsing? So what percentage?
That's probably high estimate. I would say 10 and a half.
Okay. And when you're doing web browsing, what kind of sites do you use?
I'm shopping. What's shopping? Or information on big directions, snaps, shopping, and check out customer results. The different types.
And when you check the directions, what sites do you use?
Google Maps.
And any favorite websites, either shopping websites or information websites, whatever you particularly like? Or use a lot, you know?
Not really. I like shopping. I like jewelry. I like clothes. I like whatever you need.
Okay, so it's all different. If you have any sites you
Enjoy. No, not really. Not really.
Great. Good. So we don't have to work, and now we're going to start looking at things on the screen. So I'm going to bring up the website that we're going to look at, and then I want to move the microphone, so I just want to do that. And So first, I'm going to ask you to look at this page and tell me what you make of it. Basically, what strikes you about it, whose site you think it is, what you think you can do here, what you think the site's for. Just look around and do a little narrative. You can scroll if you want to, and you can come back to it, but don't yet. It's the same page.
All right, so the first thing I know that this is a car, and I know what the car is, that I can use this car, but what was initially confusing to me was seeing these bows on top of the car because then I'm going to buy a car. So that was sort of a little confusing for a second. There's so many different kinds of cars I can get, I guess. Maybe for Molly, organized as an annual block party. I don't know what that means, so I click on that, I guess. Okay. And then some steps, it's okay, it tells me how to join, it tells me what to do, how to use it, how to join, how to use it. It's a car with an iPhone, I have no idea what that means. It's cars, yeah, I don't know what that means, what it's about, okay.
Okay. So what you know what the car is, there's like, there's what they are. And what do you think you would want to say?
I guess I would learn how to get a car, I guess I would learn what cars are available to me, I don't know what annual block party means. Yeah, and how to do it, basically, yeah. Really expect they'll explain that to me.
But I think now I'm going to ask you if I use some specific tasks. I'm going to read each one out loud and give you print copies. So you copy original. And again, as much as possible, helps if you can try to think out loud as you go along. So you don't currently own a car, and you can get all wherever you need to go without one. We're about to sign up for a class that you can't get to use public transportation. And there are other times when we need to have a car. My friends are very happy using this car for vacation trips. So you decide to explore that option. You get to the class, you need a car 1 afternoon a week for about 3 hours, and make a 50-mile round trip. You also like to have a car 1 Saturday a month to run errands all day. Figure out what this would cost you each month. Okay. So now you.
All right, so I want to know how much this is going to cost me. And down here I have 4 simple steps. Over on the right, I have how it works. And up at the top bar, I have how it works on my rates plans. I'm going to hit rates plans. And then this is to check rates, look for your city. I live in Boston. So Clark City, so I'm going to hit Boston. Okay, so it tells me rates plans. So if you're thinking about joining, this is my Boston personal driving plan. Very nice. Okay, so for an occasional driving plan, it's going to cost me, or I don't know how much it's going to cost me, but it's going to cost me $50 for an annual fee to start, and $25 for an application fee. Then my daily rate, weekend rate is different from daily rate. Okay, so weekday hourly rate is $7, and then I need it for 3 hours, so 3 times 7 is 21. And then my one Saturday a month. 1 Saturday a month is, alright, so that's $79. So, okay, so the 21 I had to multiply by 4, that's $84. Alright, so my first month is going to cost me, alright, 9, 18, 8, 16, 20. So the first month is going to cost me $238. And after the first month I can subtract $75 because I already paid my application fee and annual fee. So the first, after that it's going to cost me $163 a month. So the initial month is $238 and after that one's $233. It would be nice to have a way to do that on there to calculate right off screen rather than multiplying. But okay.
So when I was like, you put in what you needed.
Yeah, yeah. Not a big deal, but okay. Alright, so yeah, so $238 the first month and then $63 a month after that.
Alright, can you take a look around and see if there's anything else that on the page that might be relevant to
See, I'm talking about plan for new members, first time project, plan details. And then there's an extra value plan. When you join, rates shown for EDP $50. I don't know what that means. I have no idea what that means. Rates shown for extra value plan $50. I have no idea what that means. But I have no annual fee. Monthly commitment is $50 minimum. So I have to spend at least $50 a month for this to be able to do this. And then it costs me $25. Say for the $5 application, but then I get 10% discount on everything I spend. So, I guess I would have to figure out if it's percent if driving up to do this extra value plan, or if I do the occasional driving plan. But I still have no idea what that reach up to $50. I don't know what that means. You don't like that number, it's me.
Alright, great. So bottom line is you figure out what costs you a month, and there's also this other possibility that you would have to go ahead and do math and figure out what it's better to do for you. Okay, or you don't just understand what it is.
Yeah.
Alright, good. Then I have another task to do.
Yeah, okay.
And this one is, which is you're concerned about the opening of the car when you need one. Find out what this car process about availability.
Alright, so I'm going to go into this rates plan. I don't want this, so I'm going to go back to the top here. Join is a car for me, how it works, find cars. Well, let me look at find cars, see what that tells me. Well, let's see. This tells me to enter my address to find the nearest cars. Find cars by location. This tells me where they are. I don't know if it tells me about availability, but maybe I'll look. Find cars by location. Alright, here my address. I'll choose my neighborhood. Let's see if I have my neighborhood. Brookline. Alright, we'll go to Brookline. And this shows me where all these cars are and how many of them are available. 8 cars. Alright, so now I'm looking at a map, which is a big old map. Let me find my neighborhood.
How are you thinking you're going to do that?
This is a little map I've got to go over down, and I'm trying to figure out where I am. And I can go down here. So I'm making a little arrow that takes me down. Okay. But I'm not seeing anything here. No, in my neighborhood. But it's still Brookline. I live in Brookline. But I don't see anything. Well, the little marker saying that there are cars there that's not Brookline, but it's not telling me. So it's not showing me anything off the map.
Okay, that's not for you.
Yeah. And then I'm going to go back here and check the stuff and let's see if anything comes up. But I not. Yeah. Oh, well, maybe I'll put it in my address. Okay. Okay, let's see what happens up there. Okay, alright, so now it shows me where exactly, shows my house, a little smiling red balloon, and then a few blocks away it shows me where the zip car is, and I'm gonna click on that zip car, and it says, got an operator on set for $9.25 an hour, or $16 a day, which is a different rate than what they told me. On the original rate page, so I'm not confused about that.
We expected these.
It's actually the same, and I actually don't like that when that happens, and I often, that's sometimes my frustration when I'm on site, and I just leave, because I feel like I don't trust this whole thing, and I don't know what they're doing, and they rip me off, so I go away.
Alright, so try for a second, go back to the specific task again, and see if you can figure out what No, that's very good.
Okay.
That was let's see if you can find an answer to that specific question about whether you're over there making a
Alright,
problem.
I'm gonna look at the zip car for me. And I'm looking, again, I have to see. I don't want to keep running back to my shoes, that's not what I'm looking for. It's interesting. Zip car for me, I take up transportation with a car sometimes. It doesn't tell me if it's how it works. No, reserve. I'm gonna click on reserve to support some steps. So you can do it online or over the phone. Choose the car you want. Choose the time slot you want, the location you want. Reserve minutes or months in advance. But that doesn't tell me exactly. It says I can do it minutes in advance. What does that mean? Is it always available? Frequently asked questions, perhaps. Alright, what do you want? Can I go ahead and say you have $20 reserve a car? Okay, let's look at that. No, it just doesn't have to reserve it. Huh. Well, reserving zip cars. Okay, up here on the top, under questions, reserving zip cars. Will car be available when I want? Okay. It's natural for members to worry. If all reservations are made today, we monitor utilization closely, keeping availability high. Even if the zip car requires available, you still be able to reserve monthly and no away.
So let's stop. So it's an example of or usability test with a user that's thinking out loud. So as you can see, she was given a task and see how she can find the information on the website. So another thing is that there was like some suspicion with how the product was presented because the price is not accurate, so that could lead her to go to another site because this site could not be trusted, etc. So case study 2, remote testing with extended virtual reality systems. Like so many other companies, they needed to work out how to conduct their user testing remotely. In their case, it was made much harder, first because they could only test their employees, and second, they needed a quite sophisticated setup to be able to test the collaborative extended reality platforms they were working on at the time, like expert teams who planned complex machine rooms, which made testing much more difficult to achieve remotely. Despite the known benefits of remote testing, particularly for enabling wider range of people to participate, in 2004, there was a little guidance on how to actually do remote testing with company employees in industrial settings. Most of the device that was being published about remote virtual reality testing was aimed at academic researchers, where it is possible to recruit novice volunteers who had their own VR headsets and who wanted to take part in remote studies. Some tests were conducted on the participants' premises where special disinfecting routines had to be implemented. Others were conducted remotely using VR technology, and some were a hybrid. In this case study, we discuss only the first of 5 different testing examples discussed in Siltanen's and her colleagues' paper, in which the researchers investigated the benefits of multi-user virtual reality setup for a collaborative review of a product. Figure 15.4 shows a participant wearing a VR headset holding 2 paddles to initiate and control movement in the VR environment during testing. The way they did was to link them up in a different locations using the VR software environment design space. Figure 15.5 shows screenshots from one of the setup using this software. As shown, the participants and observers are represented virtually in different spaces. The participant on the left is operating machinery, and a team of observer is in the space on the right. Figure 15.6 shows a schematic of the complete setup used in the first testing case study, which took place across 4 different locations. A remote facilitator wearing a head-mounted display HMD was in the first location, and an observer with an HMD and tech support person were in the second location. One participant with an HMD was in the third location, and 2 participants were in the fourth location, one of whom was wearing an HMD, and the other was using a desktop computer. There was also an on-site assistant in the fourth locations. Microsoft Teams was used for communication between everyone involved in the test across all the sites. A mixed method approach was used for data collection in which notes, pictures, and videos were collected of participants' interactions with each other and with the technology. The data was analyzed using the affinity diagramming technique to identify related concepts. Insights that were reported from this remote user testing included that Teams or similar collaboration tool was useful for organizing the remote user testing arrangement using VR. The authors also recommend that it is advisable to record the test session for later reference, and they recommend using a camera that films the whole test site. So the insights that were collected here is that Teams or similar collaboration is useful for this kind of test. And then it's also advisable to record the whole session so that they can reference it. Sometimes the test participant was alone at test location, so the researchers advised having an assistant located near B in case there are problems. When facilitation is done remotely, the setup needs to be managed very carefully. There needs to be a dress rehearsal to ensure that all the equipment is working correctly and the participants know what to expect and what to do. So another thing they learned is that test participants was alone. So they advised someone assisted them in case there's a problem, and then when facilitation is done remotely, the setup needs to be managed very carefully. There should be a rehearsal that ensures that all the equipment is working correctly. So activity, what might have been some of the problems that researchers encountered when they switched to remote user testing with XR? How might the precautions around using people's safety during the COVID-19 pandemic have contributed to the complexity of this remote testing? First, there are many potential technical and social problems that the researchers might have encountered. On the technical side, this included that the research team needed to ensure they had sufficient head-mounted displays and a reliable way to send them to the experts who would participate in the test. So, first technical issue is the sufficiency of head-mounted displays. On the social side, some of the experts may have had limited experience with VR. Even though they were experts in dealing with the systems being tested, no one likes to be seen struggling to use unfamiliar equipment, and some experts may have been nervous about stepping outside of their normal comfort zone to participate in remote testing using XR. You may have thought of other potential problems. An added complexity was the need to ensure that all equipment and testing vicinity was sanitized after every participant, and that social distancing was maintained in order to keep participant on-site assistance and tech support people safe. From high-fidelity prototype to specification, we began by prioritizing our content. We took a wireframe of the high-fidelity prototype and ranked the components based on importance. So here, we started with prioritizing our content using this wireframe of high fidelity prototype, because we actually created an actual site or front end. This became a guideline for our redesign and served as a guideline for consistency across mobile and web. So this prototype will now serve as your guideline. So as you can see guys, your requirements for the evaluation test is not the only source of guidelines. The prototype could be a guideline as well. So here, using the high fidelity prototype, we created a content hierarchy. We use this rank list throughout our iterations to inform visual hierarchy and layout. So this visual hierarchy or this prototype are used to achieve consistency. So desktop version on the left, mobile version on the right. For the homepage, use the rank components as a guide to sketch our first mobile wireframes. So based on that, we use it to sketch our first mobile wireframes. Starting relatively fresh for this design allow us to build our layouts and visuals in clean, sustainable manner. We created 12-column grid on both web and mobile that we could use as a flexible base for a wide range of page layout. So an early example of our grid system and its application to a mid-fidelity homepage wireframe. From here, we created 3 primary column variations and began to plug and play, following the content hierarchy we specified from our old site. This process is similar to the one taught in our course on web page UX. So from here, we created 3 primary column variations and began plug and play to see what best content hierarchy that we could apply. So this process is similar to the one taught in our course in web page UX, whereas most websites seem to ignore big monitor users. One of our 3 layout targeted this group. So there's also big monitor users that could use your website. So you need to design for them as well. In addition, traditional laptop and mobile audiences as well. As new components were designed, for example, buttons, lines, type, hovers, styles, and tiles, they were added to a master component style sheet. So as new component was designed based on that prototype, they were added to the master component style sheet. This process made creating specification for developers efficient because there was no redundancy. We name each component on the page layout, allowing development to reference the detailed spec in the master component style sheet. If subsequent changes were made to one component in the style sheet, these changes did not need to be reflected in new layouts. So, this master component allows you to plug and play those different components, and it doesn't need to immediately apply on the new layout. So designing in this systematic way enabled easy collaboration with our developers who built a corresponding front-end style guide. The front-end style guide collected all product interface elements in a modular library. So this idea was basically organizing the idea or UI idea in a one master component that allows developer and UI designer to communicate. It benefited us as the UX team in 2 ways. Prototyping ideas and implementing new design was efficient, and consistent visual design was easily enforced throughout the product. Explore many design options without pressure to design the perfect layouts and visual upfront, because many rounds of testing are a key part of our progress. We expected our design to continually evolve. This benefits us in 2 ways. We didn't waste time making the early version pixel perfect, and second, the time to test and iterate was built into our project timeline from the beginning. And make live improvements during usability testing to maximize user feedback. Since we are a relatively lean team, this paradigm also offered us the opportunity to divide and conquer. As one person conducted usability tests, the other dynamically shifted wireframes based on feedback. So basically, they made improvement based on the usability text testing and then iterated along the way. Improving wireframes during the test allowed us to get significantly more feedback in a short amount of time. If we change a design, we quickly knew whether or not it worked. So it allows them to get the feedback in a short period of time. So if they change the design, they immediately know if it's working or not. This process helps us focus our design time on the layouts that had the best feedback. Rather than redesigning the entire site at once, we've opted for an incremental approach, gradually updating different pages. To maintain a basic level of consistency in the meantime, we've implemented a few universal styles to the legacy site as well, such as the header and footer style, as well as front and link colors. So rather than redesigning the entire site, they do it incrementally, gradually updating different pages. So to maintain a basic level of consistency in the meantime, they implemented a universal style, such as the header and footer style, and font and link colors. Conducting experiment. When conducting experiment in research context, specific hypotheses are tested that make a prediction about the way people will perform with an interface. The benefits are more rigor and confidence that one interface feature is easier to understand or faster to use than another. An example of a hypothesis is that context menus, that is menus, that provide both options related to the context determined by the user's previous choices are easier to select from as compared to cascading menus. So I think we'll go back to the tomorrow. Yeah, so we'll finish this everything tomorrow. And again guys, thank you for watching and see you on the next video. Peace.